Hello, welcome. My name is Patrick Dhaese, and today I want to talk to you about adult hearing screening in Europe and how this is a key prerequisite towards a hearing health strategy. Now, what is a challenge to society? If you look at this data from the World Health Organization published in the World Report on Hearing in 2021, you see that on this graphic there are two lines. The red line indicates the numbers of people with hearing loss in millions, and the black line indicates the number of people having a disabling hearing loss in millions again. Now, what you see is that if you look at the evolution through time, that in 2019, there were 430 million people having a disabling hearing loss. Now, if nothing is done, this will evolve to 711 million people by 2050. Now, clearly, there's several levels of hearing loss in there, and clearly not all age groups are affected in the same way. If you look into this graphic from Powers and Bisgard from 22, you see that as older the people get, clearly the prevalence of hearing loss will increase. And we can see that once people are aged 60 to 64, that 12.7% of the people will have a hearing loss, where if you look in the group, for example, 85 to 89, you see that 1 out of 2 is having a hearing loss. Now, it's not just about hearing loss itself, but hearing loss is also associated with a multitude of comorbidities and additional problems. And here you see a listing of some of them. For example, cognitive decline or dementia was already reported multiple times in several publications. Mental health problems, social isolation and withdrawal, reduced quality of life, fatigue both during and after work, people with a hearing loss doing less physical activities, and we also see a higher incidence of falls. Now, we also know that associated with hearing loss is a cost to society, and that cost to society also poses a challenge to it. If we look like 2 years ago, if we look across the EU, so the different member states together, the cost of unemployment, reduced productivity, and early retirement due to untreated hearing loss added up to 185 billion euros per year. Now, this was 17 billion euros more than the EU budget in 2020. If we would include non-medical expenses or medical costs for the other comorbidities, as I've listed before, then the true cost of hearing loss is estimated to be around 213 billion. Now, just to give you a comparison, the cost of dementia in Europe will be around 250 billion by 2030. Now, what are solutions to the problem? Clearly, the solutions are out there. On the one hand, you have the conventional hearing aid, where you see different types of hearing aid here on the left-hand side. And this goes from invisible in the canal systems to behind the ear, for example, superpower hearing aids. Now, if conventional hearing aids don't help anymore and people don't benefit from it anymore, for example, in noisy circumstances or in bigger groups, then there's always a solution like a cochlear implant, which you can see on the right-hand side, where obviously you have an implanted part with an electrode and a housing and a magnet, and you also have an external part where you see two different types of it here, a behind the ear processor or a single unit processor. Now, how many EU citizens, taking into account just the adults, use hearing aids and or cochlear implants? If we first look at the hearing aids itself, then again, I want to make use of the publication of Powers and Bisgard of 2022. Then you see, for example, the adoption rate for hearing aids in France and in Germany. Now you see that over time, so the different bars indicate different years, so 2009 up to 2022. And you see that the overall adoption rate increases in both countries. It has evolved from something like around 30%, let's say, to a bit more than 40% in Germany, and in France, even up to 45%. Now, this is not the same for all types of hearing loss. If you look into adoption rate, again in adults, but for different types of hearing loss, you see that there's a difference. The bars now indicate different types of hearing loss. So on the one hand, you have the blue bar indicating the mild hearing loss, the orange bar, the moderate severe hearing loss, the moderate hearing loss, the gray bar, the severe sensory neural hearing loss, and then the yellow bar, the profound hearing loss. And you see that the higher the degree of sensory neural hearing loss, the higher the adoption rate is. So for the higher levels of hearing loss, we reach, let's say, in Germany, France, and in the US, always an adoption rate of 70%. If you look into mild hearing loss, you see that adoption rates are lower, let's say 22% at the most in France. Now, is it the same for cochlear implants? The answer is no. If we look into adoption rate for cochlear implants in adults in what is called high-income countries, then you see several percentages here for several countries, and you also see the first offers mentioned below it. And you see that for not a single country, the adoption rate or uptake rate is higher than 10%. Germany scores the highest with around 10%, but other countries within the EU, like the Netherlands or Belgium, for example, score around 6.6% or 7%. So why is that? Why is the adoption rate so low at the end? There's several reasons for it. On the one hand, it's a lack of awareness amongst referring professionals. So these might be ENTs in private practice, for example, or might be hearing aid acousticians, where they lack awareness about the hearing aids, about cochlear implants, their indications, their outcomes, and the hearing journey. It is also a lack of awareness amongst the candidates themselves, amongst the population, the people who are eligible for a hearing aid or for cochlear implant, but they don't know about the existence of it, and they don't know the potential benefit of it. In addition, we see that there's no national hearing screening programs in adults in place in the countries. So you will not detect the people who have it. So people would have a hearing loss, they would not report it, they would not seek advice. And as there's no hearing screening programs in place, we would not find them automatically. In addition, there is the stigma of wearing a hearing aid or cochlear implant, for example, and being seen as disabled. There might be the fear of surgery, and I've put this in italic because this is obviously something which only applies to cochlear implants. But then also there might be lack of adequate funding, lack of access, lack of human and infrastructural resources, for example. However, this would not be the case in the economically advanced European countries. But differences clearly occur within the 27 member states of the EU. Now, if you look into the concept of an adult hearing screening program, what are the recommendations of the World Health Organization? Again, going back to the World Report on Hearing of 2021, at that point in time and in this report, WHO came up with an action plan. The action plan is known under the acronym of HEARING. Now, HEARING stands for Hearing Screening and Intervention, Ear Disease Prevention and Management, Access to Technologies, Rehabilitation Services, Improved Communication, Noise Reduction, and Greater Community Engagement. And it is also the concept that the first four, so the HEAR, can be integrated and delivered through strengthened health systems. Now, let's focus on the hearing screening and intervention in that sense. Referring to another report of the World Health Organization on specifically screening of 2021, which you see here a picture of on the left-hand side, I think the aim is really that all older people should be screened with the aim of identifying at the earliest possible stage those with a hearing loss who would benefit from the use of hearing technology or from non-technical interventions such as education, counseling, and communication training. Now, what are the intervals and at which age would you start? Normally, all adults from the age of 50 should be screened regularly for hearing loss. Initially, it might be conducted at a 5-yearly interval until the age of 64, but from the age of 65 onwards, the frequency of screening should be increased to every 1 to 3 years. And obviously, where possible, the hearing screening schedules should then also be aligned with other health checks, for example, already existing in other countries, or several countries. Now, what are the steps in there towards the screening? On the one hand, there's the first step, which is just using day-to-day life using simple questions. So it's questions, as you can see, do you have a hearing problem now? Do you have a diagnosed hearing loss, and so on? There are scaled questions in there. For example, how would you characterize your hearing at this point in time? And there's also the use of screening questionnaires, such as the hearing handicap inventory for the elderly. The second step might be the use of more semi-objective tests, let's say, where tests like the detection of pure tones in both ears at a fixed decibel level might be used. A test which is very often used also in the WHO app, for example, on screening, is a digit triple in noise test. And you see some other tests also listed below. Now, what happens? So if a refer result is there after wax removal, if this was indicated, then a diagnostic hearing assessment should happen. And that is there then to confirm the hearing loss and obviously establish the degree of hearing loss and the nature of it. And then you see which tests can be performed, with obviously also speech audiometry then in quiet and in noise. Now, as soon as the diagnosis has been made and the nature and the degree of hearing loss has been defined, then an intervention should happen. And the intervention consists out of several parts. On the one hand, it's about basic education and counseling for people who have the hearing loss themselves, but also for the caregivers, the families, in essence, to facilitate psychological acceptance and adjustment. It should also include communication training and, where needed, adaptations in social and physical environments. Now, in addition, obviously, if there's the need, then the type of hearing technology should be assessed, and whatever then is needed, whether it's hearing aids, cochlear implants, or other hearing implants, or hearing assistive technologies, should then be provided and fitted by a trained professional who's authorized to do so. Now, in which European member states are national adult hearing screening programs currently in place? I think the answer is very easy and very straightforward. Nowhere. In not a single country within the EU 27 countries, we have adult hearing screening programs in place. So what needs to change? Clearly, hearing loss must be addressed as a public health issue. It needs to get higher on the agenda of the policymakers, given that it's such a big, or that it has such a big impact by means of the impact on society. It's linking to all the different comorbidities, and it creates a huge economical cost to society if hearing loss remains unaddressed. There is also a need for policymakers to allocate resources for and plan strategically to promote access to ear and hearing care. Thirdly, public health strategies should address prevention, screening such as adult hearing screening, and early intervention of hearing loss. And finally, adult hearing screening should be implemented in all member states in line with other health screening programs which are already existing. And I think it's only like that, if we can accomplish these different goals, that together we can make a difference, and that I think that we can work together within the EU towards a hearing health strategy. With that, I would like to thank you And if you want to have more information, please consult one of the websites, or please feel so free to send me an email. Thank you very much.